So, Atom Eve was created in a government lab as a project to make the ultimate superhero, but it was under the control of the US military. The project was spearheaded by Dr. Elias Brandyworth, who utilized a down-on-their-luck woman named Polly in the experiments. However, Polly eventually grew attached to her unborn child and wished to protect her from the government, and Elias soon came to feel the same way. At some point, the building that Elias and Polly resided in came under attack by the Lizard League, who dueled with the Guardians of the Globe. This event was in actuality created by Elias to serve as a distraction so he and Polly could escape. The two fled to the Valley Hospital, but during the trip, Polly started going into early labor, and due to the baby's unique nature, powerful energy was being generated inside Polly, which was slowly killing her. During this time, the government leader, Erickson, attempted to make Dr. Brandyworth bring Polly and her soon-to-be-born baby back to the lab. Brandyworth refused and continued taking her to the hospital where the child was born and swapped with the stillborn baby of Betsy and Adam Wilkins to get her out of the life of being used as a weapon by the US military. Her new parents named her Samantha Eve Wilkins, and she would be raised by them. Throughout her early life, she would stare at the molecules in the world around her. She would also draw molecules and build them out of Legos. She helped her babysitter Zach study for his chemistry test, which he presumably did well on. After this, her parents decided to enroll her in a special school for gifted children, though Samantha did not really enjoy it, as she had no real friends there. Samantha eventually made her first real friend in a girl named Val, and a few years later, the former would discover her powers. However, when she showed off her powers to Val, it only scared her away, which resulted in their friendship ending. Samantha would then get kicked out of her special school and then enroll in a public one. Sometime later, Samantha would start her career as a superhero known as Atom Eve, aiming to use her powers to fight crime. However, this would draw the attention of Dr. Elias Brandyworth, who went into hiding to avoid the government, which sought to use Eve as a weapon in the first place. He warned her not to use her powers since it would risk revealing her existence to the government, but they eventually did discover that Sam was alive from witnessing her use her powers after she chose not to listen to Elias. The government immediately sent their creations and failed attempts to replicate Samantha's powers, who were technically her siblings, to retrieve her. Samantha fought against them, but due to their unstable nature, they all soon perished one by one throughout the battle. Soon, distraught and weakened from the fight, Samantha was captured alongside Elias by the government. Inside their lab, the government intended to use both Samantha and Elias to create more of the former. They then revealed that Polly, Sam's biological mother, was still alive, but put in horrific condition, also they could use her to create her unfortunate siblings. Elias fought against the government, but was accidentally killed alongside Polly in the ensuing fight. Their two deaths bolstered Sam's powers and enraged her to the point where she used her unlocked powers to erase the government officials' memories of ever trying to create her. Sam fled the scene and returned home only to find out she had missed her birthday party. She then got into a fight with her father and retreated to her room, still mourning over the loss of her original family. Later, for high school, Eve attended Reginald Vell Johnson High School. While battling Kilcannon again, she would encounter Rex Sloan. Rex introduces himself and asks Eve for advice on his mission. Eve asks Rex to stay the night and they go to bed. She would wake up the next morning with Rex heading to the Pentagon. Later, Rex arrives back to Eve's room and reveals that he killed Radcliffe and destroyed the house he lived in. Eve comforts him, but panics because the government will likely salvage what's left. They arrive on the scene and notice that Steven Erickson is salvaging the scene. They head into the area and commence battle with the government officials. Eve draws their fire and Rex attempts to destroy the building. He does so by touching the pipe to the building. Erickson attempts to recruit Rex, but Rex refuses, stating he only needs Eve. They kiss and after destroying the facility, escape to Art Rosenbaum's shop to get Rex a superhero costume. Later, when the Flaxans attack Earth, Invincible is shot at, but Atom Eve saves him by setting up a force field. Invincible mutters her name, but is told to take the old woman to a safe place. Robot tells Eve that enemy tanks will line up to kill her and she takes care of it, while Robot keeps telling everybody else what is happening. Duplicate and Rex Splode continued attacking. Eve tells Invincible to take the old woman to a hospital since they had it covered. However, Robot said that it was possible they didn't. The team started getting overwhelmed and was about to get shot at once again until the aliens started aging to death and retreating. At school, Mark sees and walked up to Eve and he thanks her for saving his butt. Eve realized who he was, and Mark mentioned his name was Invincible, which Eve described as optimistic and said that everybody called her Eve. She said he looked like he needed to talk about what had happened, and the two leave. Mark tells her that he never connected the dots between her and her superhero personality, which she says is because of psychology. He mentions that he even follows Teen Team on Instagram, and she revealed that that was them, everybody's fourth favorite superhero team. Mark mentions he likes them more than Fight Force, and she agrees they're better than Fight Force, also mentioning Fight Force's loss to the Lizard League last year. She asks him if he is new to the whole superhero business, and he reveals that he has just gotten his powers. She tells him that he had done well as a rookie, which he didn't buy since people had gotten hurt and he had frozen, but she told him that he had helped people escape and revealed that she used to throw up before fights, but got used to it. Mark said that it just hadn't been what he had expected, and she confirms that fights weren't what they seemed on television. She tells him to meet Teen Team after school, and Mark agrees. Eve and Invincible fly through the city, and at one point he worries that he has lost her, crashing into a billboard. They try flying again and fly through a bridge until a hole in the ground opens and Invincible meets Teen Team. When they get there, Rex makes out with Eve until he greets him, saying that they had won the fight without him, but Duplicate reveals that it had been because the aliens died. Robot greets Invincible, as well as Duplicate. Robot tells the team about the Flaxons and asks Invincible if they can count on him to help in the future. Rex asks Eve and Invincible why they had gotten to the top of a building together, and Eve reminds him that they go to the same school, and Rex tells them that he had never gone to high school. Robot tells them to focus since the Flaxons are back, but this time it seems they have found a way to resist the time stream. Eve asks Mark if he is ready, and he confidently says that he is. Teen Team attacks the aliens, who are fighting with superior technology than they were. Eve was able to drive many of them back, but had something thrown to her face which covered it, compromising her concentration and leaving Eve helpless. Mark deflected beams thrown at him by cannons, but was taken out by a kind of glue that didn't let him move. Robot tells the team that the Flaxons seem to have used their time wisely. When the Flaxons' leader was about to kill Eve, Invincible let out a yell that blew everything at a certain radius away from him. He punched the Flaxon leader, who started aging once his bracelet broke and saved Eve. The team realized they had to destroy the wristbands, and the aliens started dying soon after, which forced them to leave. Rex told him that he took everything he had said back and congratulated him, followed by Eve. Later, the Flaxon army invades the city once again, and Robot tells Teen Team that the Flaxons are now immune to the time stream and that they should consider the city lost. He tells them that he'll contact Cecil and request a nuclear response, but everybody disagrees. Invincible starts fighting the army, but is swiftly brought down and punched repeatedly in the face by the leader. But when Atom Eve starts getting hurt badly, Invincible pushes back fiercely with some kind of inner strength. Just then, Omni-Man arrives and starts defending the city, resisting all the attacks thrown at him and sending the enemies back where they had come from. However, when the leader looked up at Omni-Man once more, he punched him and went into the portal with him. Eve, along with Teen Team, was shocked to find out that Omni-Man was Invincible's father after he called out to him. Later, when it was discovered that the Guardians of the Globe had been murdered, Eve was invited to the funerals. Mark asks if everybody has to go through a funeral again while looking at the graves for a second speech. He's told by Eve that the actual bodies were elsewhere since people look for souvenirs later. Nolan tells the people gathered that the people who had died were his friends and mentors. He mentions that at least the fallen heroes would rest together, and Olga was upset that she couldn't see her late husband. When she threw herself at the ground, Debbie rushed to help her. When Eve asks him if he's alright, Mark mentions that he's unsure how to feel, since it could have been his mother burying his father. Later, Atom Eve makes it to Teen Team's headquarters, where she sees Duplicate, who was acting suspiciously after a shower and had missed the funeral. Eve takes a look inside the shower and sees Rexplode moaning and kissing Duplicate's twins, which makes her furious. However, Kate tells her that Rex had told her that she was now dating Invincible, which she says is not true. At the Pentagon, Atom Eve takes part in the tryout for the new Guardians of the Globe and faces off against the Hunk. She defeats him quickly and shows a lot of anger in the process. Invincible asks Rexplode what is going on with her, but he simply mentions he doesn't know. In the end, Robot introduces the new Guardians: Black Samson, Shrinking Ray, Duplicate, Monster Girl. After that, he mentioned that Atom Eve would be the last member, telling them that he would be announcing it publicly later, but Eve tells him that she couldn't be on the same team as Rex and Kate and leaves the team. Invincible follows Eve and asks her what happened. Eve tells him how Rex cheated on her, with Kate saying that Rex had told Kate that Eve and him were going out together. Invincible admits that he believed Rex was an asshole, but Eve said that that hadn't always been the case. Later, Invincible and Atom Eve flew toward Mount Rushmore. As they did, Cecil told them that he wouldn't be asking for their help, but Omni-Man was busy and the new Guardians were a shit show. He tells them their target was Doc Seismic, who was doing things that made no sense. They believe that the gloves cause him a concussion every time he uses them. Doc Seismic causes eruptions and causes Mount Rushmore to split. As Abraham Lincoln's face fell, Invincible caught it just in time before it hurt anybody, putting it back. Invincible and Eve fight Doc Seismic, who uses his bracelets to escape from them at a high speed and tells them that they should be on his side. Doc Seismic proves himself to be very strong and causes many people to nearly die if it weren't for the two heroes. After Mark barely managed to save a group of people, Doc Seismic tried to attack, but his bracelets were damaged by Eve. Due to his faulty bracelets, Doc Seismic nearly fell into lava, but was caught by Eve, who was in turn helped by Invincible. Doc Seismic fell anyway, and Invincible jumped after him, not able to grab him in time after some big explosions. Eve then remarks that Doc Seismic is toast. Mark then says, somewhat sarcastically, that none of these sound good. Unbeknownst to Invincible, Atom Eve then tries to kiss Invincible, but quickly leaves, and Mark tells Eve they will talk later and thanks her for helping him. Later, Eve takes down her pictures with Rex and cries as she does so. When she goes outside, she sees fireworks while smiling. There, she meets Rex, who made them with his powers. He tells her he knew he had screwed up, but didn't know why since he loved her. He asks for a do-over, but Eve declines and wishes him luck with his new team, and leaves. Soon, Eve goes to Mark's house, only to find him on his bed with Amber, kissing her. She tells herself that it was good for Mark and is glad he found someone, and then flies away. Later, at school, Mark tells Eve that he does not want to lie to Amber, but also can't tell her the truth. Eve tells him that was why dating normal people sucked, but Mark counters by saying that things between her and Rex hadn't worked out, which angered her. Mark apologizes to her, and she tells him that she has a lot of things to deal with, so he asks her to help him out with Amber's stuff, and he would help her out with her stuff. However, she mentions that she doesn't know if she wants to be a superhero at the moment, so Mark tells her that he would be there for her if she needed to talk about it. She leaves, but turns around to tell him that he should only tell Amber his identity if he is serious about her. After class, Mark complains about a test, but Eve tells him it's important. When Mark asks if she is okay, she tells him she has left home and didn't know what she was doing. Amber joins them and asks Mark if he will be joining her. Mark tells her he would, and Amber tells Eve that Mark had volunteered to help at the Beckwell Community Center, where they cooked dinners for anyone who was hungry, which impressed her. After Mark left, Amber invited Eve, who tried to excuse herself but couldn't since she was no longer busy saving the world. Before she left, Amber asked Eve if she had seen Mark acting weird since he was always late and didn't show up at times. However, Eve defends Mark, telling her that even though Mark is bad at time management, he is a good guy. Then, Eve meets Amber at Beckwell Community Center, where the latter shows her around. When Eve asks if Mark is there, she's told that he has 15 minutes to be there or he will be dumped. Then Eve is handed an apron and is put on chopping duty. Amber and Eve pour soup for everybody, who Amber knows. Eve tells her that being so involved was impressive, but Amber says that she had thought Mark would be there with her. Later, Eve gets a call saying that Mark is injured and tells Amber that she knows it's hard to love someone, even when it seems that they don't love you back, but assured her that Mark loves her and would be there if he could. When Mark wakes after having nearly died, Nolan tells him he knew he would pull through and tells him he was out for 6 days, which shocks Mark. Eve tells him she covered for him with Amber, telling her he had gotten hit by a bus, and mentions Monster Girl and Black Samson were still unconscious. In Mark's room, Eve pays him a visit. He thanks her for talking to Amber when he got hurt and hugs her. He tells her he will be visiting Upstate University and invites her, but she mentions that she won't be going to college. Mark questions why, since her grades were way better than his. Eve says that, with her powers, she could stop natural disasters and make people's lives better. Mark understands, which somewhat surprises Eve, but he tells her that he had messed up downtown and that Black Samson and Monster Girl nearly died because of him, and wonders if both of them need a fresh start. Debbie calls Mark, telling him that William and Amber were there, and Eve looks at him for a moment, then leaves. Eve's mother asks why Eve couldn't do her superhero work from home, but she tells her that she knew why, as she made the door disappear on her father. Her father comes from around the back and tells her that he wouldn't allow it since she would die, and tells her that the worst day of his life was the day she got powers. Eve leaves, and her father orders her to go back, but she doesn't listen. Eve makes herself coffee at her treehouse and browses her phone while looking at the view. Later in the day, Mark runs into Eve, and she realizes that she will be helping him today. Mark tells Eve what happened with Amber, which she empathizes with him. He says he doesn't know who he has to be, and she says that the same has happened to her. She tells him that a lot had changed for her as well, and she felt she had upgraded since living with her parents. Later, Mark and Eve hear an explosion, and Eve tells him that they should call Cecil. He tells her that it wasn't their problem anymore, since she had run away from Rex and being a superhero. However, she tells him that she didn't ignore the world when it needed her. He says that the world was fine without him, but she tells him that he should do something to help and leaves. As they flew, Eve tells him that she was glad he came to help, but he tells her that he was only there to make sure she didn't get hurt. Soon, Mark saw Nolan being crushed by the creature and raced forward in order to help him. As Nolan was about to be eaten, Mark punches the creature and sends it flying. Eve gets called by Debbie and asks what is happening. Nolan awoke and Mark happily told him it was about time they teamed up together. When the creature rose, Cecil told Eve not to help them and get to Guardians HQ. The Guardians watch the transmission as well. Duplicate suggests going to help them, but Rudy tells them that they needed to follow Cecil's orders and stay in the bunker since the battle is beyond their capabilities. Black Samson agrees, but Eve flies in, asking what is happening. Rex tells her that Omni-Man was fighting him, and Rudy says that he hopes Mark lives up to his name. The Guardians watch as the fight between Omni-Man and Invincible unfolds. Black Samson tells them to gear up, because even if they couldn't stop the fight, they could save lives. Rudy tries to remind them of Cecil's orders, but Shrink Ray tells him they don't care. Monster Girl walks up to him and reminds him he isn't a robot anymore. Teen Team and Atom Eve then help with cleaning up the rubble. Later, William goes to Mark's house, where he's joined by Eve. She asks him if he has seen Mark, but William says that he hasn't, since everything he has seen on the news. Realizing he had revealed Mark's identity as Invincible, Eve told him she knew as well, and says she doesn't know if he was okay. Later, Mark's friends ask him how his mother is doing, and he tells them that it isn't good. He doesn't know what to say, and tells them that he feels empty inside, and nothing seems real. He asks if they can talk about something else, but William tells him that everybody in the whole world was talking about it, which angers Eve and Amber. Mark gets a call and leaves as Cecil tells him he needs him. Cecil tells him that something is flying towards them from deep space. As Mark leaves, the whole restaurant shakes, and Eve tells Amber and William she is Atom Eve, which surprises William. However, neither Amber nor William recognized her, much to Eve's dismay. 1 month after the destruction of Chicago, Eve meets up with Mark. She tells him that life in the treehouse is okay, but lonely. However, she cares more for Mark, who is still limp from Omni-Man. Worried that he may become him, Eve instead tells him he won't become him, but Cecil doesn't think that, to which Eve should prove him wrong. A few months after Mark works for Cecil, she along with William and Amber are seen graduating and celebrating in her treehouse. She admits to William that she will be helping with rebuilding Chicago. The next day, she cleans up the destroyed building. She is scolded by a greedy worker who tells her that it was not part of the code to rebuild it so quickly, but is stood up by a woman and her daughter, who thanks Eve for fixing up the damage, though they wished the same could apply to the playground, to which Eve quickly rebuilds and she sees the daughter imitate her movements. Eve then meets up with her parents, who discover their taxes are dangerously high and food is low. Eve tries to fix the problem by building food for them, but Adam quickly discards the items, claiming them to be fake, including a golden apple. Eve admits that, because he had lost his 20-year-old job from the Chicago incident, life has not been easy. She admits she's trying to help and wants him to stop with the man of the house personality. This, however, enrages Adam to the point where he shows her the playground she made, which became faulty sometime after she left. Because the pipes became unstable, they were never able to rebuild the playground. He calls her dangerous and basically a fool for thinking her superpowers can solve any realistic problems within the world without compromises. Eve is horrified to learn the playground she built has collapsed. She is traumatized by this outcome and leaves. Adam still scolds her to return only when she truly learns her lesson. This would result in various negative changes in Eve's life, such as abandoning her treehouse and living in the teen team's old hangout. Upon arriving at the college, which Mark, Amber, William attends, she meets with Amber and William, asking where Mark is. But he is gone. Eve admits it's been a long week, and Amber tries to invite her for coffee, but is interrupted by one of their friends for studying, and Eve is told to come by tomorrow. One night in the teen team building, after she takes a shower, she hears a loud banging sound and wakes up. Her old enemy, Kill Cannon, steals a powerful battery. They fight, and for the first time in a while, Atom Eve becomes careless. She fights him all over the bridge where the teen team base is located, becoming impulsive to the point where she wants a real match from Kill Cannon. This nearly gets people hurt in the process, but this has proven to be more than that when two car passengers fall into ocean. She quickly apprehends Kill Cannon and saves the passengers, but they are not moving. Luckily, she notices a few medical officers and shouts to the paramedics to save the two. The next day, Eve is seen on a bus rather than flying. She ignores Amber's text, and Eve appears and moves back to her old home, with Adam Wilkins awaiting her return. 2 months after the Chicago incident, Eve is shown to be in her parents' home adjusting to her new mediocre lifestyle, and then comes across her old boyfriend, Rex Splode, who wants her help. At first, Eve questions why he's here. Rex admits that everyone has made mistakes, including him. Eve is still undergoing constant stress from when she foolishly fought Kill Cannon and nearly got people killed. Rex admits she has faults, but doesn't need to stress as the victims who were saved by the paramedics are doing well. This makes Eve happy and motivated to help the Guardians with the Sequids. Soon, Eve arrives in the space shuttle, with Mark hugging Eve. Robot claims that she should have a plan if she becomes infected by the Sequids, to which she creates an armor to protect herself. In space, Mark and Eve talk about current events and then are interrupted when the Martian's battleship destroys the shuttle, forcing Eve to create a force bubble that keeps everyone alive. In the Martian spaceship, Bulletproof accidentally smashes a Sequid that alerts the whole army. Eve creates a shield to prevent infection from them. However, the Endless Might is too strong and shatters the shield. After Eve's shield shatters, the Guardians attempt to delay the Sequids. Robot and Eve are saved by Shapesmith, as Robot is able to build an EMP. The Immortal quickly grabs it, but is stopped by Invincible, claiming he is faster and stronger and more capable. Immortal agrees and helps take down the mind-controlled Russ Livingston. However, Eve and Robot are discreetly controlled by the Sequids, but saved once more by the EMP device. The Guardians quickly take Russ Livingston away from the Sequids and try to escape, but are confronted by the Martian Emperor and Martian guards, who thank Invincible and the Guardians for saving them from the Sequids and want Shapesmith to be executed. They escape, but Invincible goes into space to destroy the Martian spaceships. The Guardians crash land in front of the Global Defense Agency and arrive to recover. Roos is brought into extensive care, still unable to comprehend his situation. Meanwhile, the others notice the Immortal in a dark morgue room, staring at a bloody cloth of duplicate. Mark notices Eve staring at doctors fixing Rexplode, while another room shows shrinking Ray under extensive care as well. Much later, a funeral ensues. Eve is there, along with Mark Grayson when Immortal is seen speaking about Duplicate, who died during another attack. In the hospital, Mark meets up with Rex, who are now good friends, and talk about Amber. Eve also arrives and meets with Mark. Eve gives Rex magazine books and also alludes to his boredom with Mark trying to keep Amber as a girlfriend. Eve tries to ask why Mark is talking to Rex about Amber, but to no avail, as he is nose buried in his books. At Eve's home, she is greeted by Cecil Stedman, who offers her a position on the team, but she declines. Then Amber also arrives to talk about problems she's having with Mark. Eve talks about her first boyfriend, Rexplode, and how it was a disaster. At times, Amber often feels like she is having the utmost stress with or without hanging him, leading to Eve asking why is she not saying this to Mark. Atom Eve later calls Mark, who was with Amber at Comic-Con, to see if he could find Rex, as she is busy dealing with Kill Cannon again. Atom Eve spends time on the Teen Team headquarters rooftop until she sees Mark flying towards her. Right away she goes and hugs him. The two talk and Mark almost shares what he learned from her future self regarding her feelings for him, but decides to wait another time. Eve acknowledges that he shouldn't suffer so much. The two then stare at the city as she does her best to comfort him. Later, she heads to Mark's dorm and asks Mark where they stand on their relationship. Eve reveals she liked him while she was with Rex and that her time in Africa has made her miss him more. Mark tells Eve that he knew already because an alternate, older version of Eve told him how she felt about him. Eve asks how Mark felt about her before her alternate version revealed her feelings for him, but Mark was unsure what he felt. She leaves for Africa before Mark could explain anything. Mark goes to see Eve until Cecil asks for their help in stopping Dr. Seismic. When they go to the location, Eve is knocked unconscious for a short time until she is imprisoned by Seismic. But soon, they are saved by the Reanimen and Darkwing. After the battle, Mark tells Eve that he knows Cecil covered up Darkwing's incident in Midnight City and decides to get some answers. Afterward, Mark reveals to Eve that after Cecil found his weakness and attacked him, he was thinking about Eve. Eve grabs his hand and they kiss, symbolizing the start of their intimate relationship. Eve again asks her mom to let her move back in, with her mom agreeing. Eve then helps the former Guardian members after they left the team. Eve and Mark would go on a date in Paris until Mark is asked to go to the future. After Mark returns, Eve and him go on several dates in various locations such as Egypt, France, Italy, Antarctica, and space. They head to Mark's room and get intimate for the first time. Afterward, Mark and Eve would sleep until morning when Oliver interrupts them. Mark gets a call and heads to see what it's about. Eve leaves and heads back to her house. Mark comes to Eve's room and reveals that Amber had called him and Gary had abused her physically. Later, Eve visited a prison and established a private security firm named Invincible Incorporated for Mark, marking their new business. Mark and Eve would receive their first call from Invincible Incorporated. Mark responds to the call to find out that alternate versions of himself are leveling cities around the world. Eve would attempt to stop one of them and succeeds. She regroups with Mark to help the Cyberforce take down another version of him. They kill the alternate Mark, but not without Eve being injured. Mark takes Eve to the hospital so she can recover from her injuries. While Eve is resting, she would be visited by her parents and Mark. 2 days later, Eve recovers from her coma to see that Mark is battling what the news believes to be Nolan. However, it is revealed that Conquest is battling Mark. She releases her medical tubes, worried that Mark may be killed during the battle. While doing so, Eve accidentally reveals to her parents that Mark is invincible. Eve asks Cecil to send her to his location. When Eve arrives, Mark asks that Eve doesn't interfere, only for Conquest to break Mark's leg. Eve holds Conquest with a restraining bubble, only for him to thunderclap out of it. Conquest pummels Eve and impales her, nearly killing her in the process. Mark catches Eve and lays her on the ground. While Mark and Conquest continue their battle, Eve's near-death experience overrides her mental blocks and she recovers from her wounds, losing her clothes in the process. She emits a powerful blast. Mark moves out of the way in time, but Conquest loses much of his skin and muscle tissue. Eve passes out and Conquest attempts to kill her, but Mark protects her. She wakes up to see that Mark has killed Conquest and that Mark is still alive. She is retrieved by the Guardians and Mark is taken to a hospital to heal from his injuries. When he wakes up, Mark notices that Eve's breasts have become larger, and that leads to an intimate moment. Mark's mum arrives and interrupts them as she is worried, going so far as to have Mark stop being a superhero. Later, Eve and Mark would go to attend Rex's funeral after his death in the Invincible War. After Robot gave his speech, Eve would give hers, declaring that she loved him. She ended the speech early due to her emotional stress. Eve confessed to Mark that she started liking Mark while she was with Rex and that she never gave Rex a chance. Mark smiles and they head to Eve's house to spend some time together. After recovering, while Mark was fighting and rebuilding the leveled cities, Eve and her mother were preparing dinner for Mark to make a proper introduction to her parents. It goes badly when she asks Mark what his father does, not realizing what his father did to the planet and Mark. Afterwards, Eve would negotiate with the Stronghold prison warden to get 3 months of free services, considering what's happening in the Invincible War events. He reluctantly agrees and they fly home. Eve notices that her powers are acting up and they see Oliver on the way, who looks older than before. Mark and Eve head to her room and Eve goes to the bathroom. Mark knocks and Eve demands that Mark go away. Eve, crying, learns that her powers are acting strange because she is pregnant with Mark's child. Mark asks Eve if she's okay, noticing that she's acting differently. Later, Eve and Mark would get a call to stop a nuclear power plant attack. They arrive to see an alien attacking. While the alien known as Universa is fighting Mark, Eve manages to land a blow on her, but her powers fail her. Mark uses the opportunity to grab her staff and gets shocked by it. Eve punches Universa, with Mark realizing that her powers are in the staff. Cecil then asks Mark for help in stopping the Sequids. Later, when he returns, Mark reveals that he killed Russ Livingston to Eve. Eve comforts him until Cecil arrives to speak with Mark. Eve would go to William's dorm to tell him about her pregnancy. Eve would tell William that she does want children, but isn't ready for a child at such a young age. Later, she would arrive to see Mark on his roof, but they are interrupted by Nolan and Alan the alien asking for Mark's help in the Viltrumite War. Mark and Eve go to dinner to discuss Mark seeing his father again. The duo would discuss the various Viltrumites Mark has fought. The next day, Eve would have Mark settle a shopping mall invasion, but she decided to send Oliver instead. Eve would sleep with Mark again before he goes away. She asks to embrace him one last time before he leaves, in tears. While Mark is gone, Eve has bulletproof assist in the Invincible's business. After the Viltrumite War is over, Mark arrives at Eve's house and sees she has gained weight. Eve embraces Mark after 10 months of fighting in the Viltrumite War. Eve reveals that her powers are back in place and that she was scared because Mark might have died. Eve later goes to see William and tells him that Mark is back, and she is also afraid to tell Mark about her pregnancy. While Mark is performing jobs for Invincible Incorporated, Eve is speaking with Debbie, much to Mark's confusion. Afterwards, Eve has dinner with Kate, the Immortal, and their 2 children. The four would trade stories back and forth until Kate has Eve assist in bathing Kate's children. She begins to cry upon seeing Abraham and heads outside. Mark goes to check on her and asks her what's wrong. She attempts to hide her tears, but with enough persistence, Eve reveals that she had an abortion. Mark apologizes for leaving her and embraces her. After revealing everything to Mark, Eve moves into the Grayson household and takes residence in Mark's old parents' bedroom. When Mark and Eve arrive home, they find out that Debbie and Nolan are together again and heading to Taliskria. Mark later tells Eve about Las Vegas's destruction by Dinosaurus. Eve comforts Mark, hoping to help him cope with it. Later, Mark and Eve would go to a welcoming party for Monster Girl and Robot. Afterward, Mark talks with Eve and asks if she still loves him. Mark goes on to say that he will make a decision that will seem bad at first, but will be better in the long run. Later, Cecil arrives at Mark's house and reveals to Eve that Mark had released Dinosaurus. Eve is upset at him, citing that she could have helped him if she knew his plan. Then, after Mark was infected with the Scourge virus, Eve and the other Guardians head to see Mark's condition. Eve goes to see Mark in quarantine and cries, fearing that he may not make it. Bulletproof comforts her until Frag asks them to leave. While Mark is healing, Bulletproof would again assist Invincible Incorporated. Eve mentions that Bulletproof helping is great, but the client paid for Invincible. Bulletproof takes Mark's costume and does a job for Eve. Bulletproof attempts to comfort Eve and sleep with her, but Eve refuses. After some weird activity on the moon, Eve asks Cecil to take her to see Mark, and she'll fly the rest of the way. She goes to see Frag and readies herself to fight him. Frag laughs at her and directs her to Dinosaurus. Eve would enlist the help of Alan, Oliver, and Bulletproof to rescue Mark. While attempting to stop Alan from hurting Dinosaurus, Mark breaks his radius and his humerus bone, so Eve and the others rush him to the Pentagon and he is taken in for surgery. Eve comforts Mark as he feels helpless now that he may never be invincible again. They say goodbye to Alan and Oliver after Oliver apologizes for infecting Mark. After Oliver and Alan leave, Eve and Mark do some lovemaking. Then, while the Flaxons invade London, Eve asks Cecil to transport her there. However, the invasion is halted by Monster Girl defeating their leader. Later, Eve takes Mark to a comic book signing, and later that night, they would have sex, only for Mark to get his powers back. Later, during Mark's battle with Dinosaurus, Eve is one of the many people to witness Mark's death on television, crying after seeing it. She would cause a wreckage until Nolan and Debbie arrive. She tells them the bad news until Mark arrives, revealing it to be a clone rather than him. Mark calls Eve to take him private, and he tells Eve that he's working for Cecil again. He also realizes that he must be smarter about his decisions, and just then Eve reveals that she is pregnant again. Mark states he will support her in every decision she makes. Eve refuses to abort her child again and decides to keep the baby. Eve asks that Mark keep her pregnancy a secret. They head downstairs to see Nolan and Debbie kissing, much to their disgust. Mark and Eve arrive to help with the cleanup process of the leveled cities. Robot, shocked at seeing him again, attempts to attack him, and they stop when Cecil commands them to. Afterwards, Mark has Cecil recommend an independent contractor named Sherry to check on Eve's fetus. Eve is hesitant at first, but allows her to do so. Sherry recommends that Eve stop using her powers immediately because of their nature. Mark tells Eve of Nolan's inauguration as Emperor. Mark is about to propose to Eve, but Eve beats him to it and creates a ring. They become engaged and have sex afterward. Eve begins to notice that her using her powers hurt her child. They call Sherry and she tells them that the fetus is fine. However, Sherry knows now that her powers will kill her child and tells Eve that she must cease all attempts of using her powers. Eve goes to William and Rick's to tell them of her engagement. Afterwards, she arrives home to see Angstrom Levy in their house. Angstrom attempts to suffocate her until Mark arrives. He sends Mark into another dimension and talks with Eve, wondering why she hasn't used her powers. Angstrom uses his extra-dimensional knowledge and finds out that Eve is pregnant. Eve argues with Angstrom, stating that she will no longer focus on revenge, and when Mark arrives, she will continue her life as normal. She also says that Angstrom can use his powers for something better than revenge. Mark arrives again with his evil counterpart, and Angstrom brings Mark back and has a change of heart after Eve's story, deciding to surrender. But the Mohawk Mark kidnaps Angstrom and takes Hishem to his home dimension. Mark has Robot trace the signal of Angstrom's location, hoping to find him. Eve would help build a crib for her child and has Mark assist her, but they get into a dispute on the Angstrom incident. They go to see Nolan and Debbie to have dinner with them. She accidentally reveals she's pregnant after Nolan was about to reveal it to Debbie. Eve becomes upset and makes it clear during dinner. After, Eve and Mark get into another dispute about Angstrom, and she asks that he tell Robot to stop working on the dimensional portal. After Robot tells Mark he can find a way to Levy's location, Eve and Mark argue again. Eve goes on to say that he shouldn't abandon the baby. Mark argues that he must eliminate him so that he may never be a threat to them again. Eve slaps Mark, though it has no effect, and storms off. 6 months later, Mark arrives at his house to see Eve knitting. Eve reveals that Robot told her that he was killed and that caused her to stop eating, and it nearly killed her fetus. Mark goes on to say that Eve was right about Angstrom, but Eve interrupts. She goes on to say that raising her child without Mark is the best option. Mark attempts to get Eve to leave for her safety, but she doesn't listen. Eve states that she doesn't want to see Mark again and breaks up with him, much to his sorrow. Mark leaves, asking that she go somewhere safe. While Mark was away, Robot sent a drone to Eve's house. Mark reveals that Robot had killed Cecil Stedman and asks Eve to leave. In the midst of the battle, Robot emits a powerful sonic pulse and Eve attempts to escape, only to have her right leg dismembered. However, they manage to escape in time and head to the Viltrumite warship, where Eve gave birth to a daughter and was given a prosthetic leg. Mark arrives and brings her daughter to the surgery room. Mark attempts to apologize and Eve attempts to comfort him by grabbing him, but Mark pulls back, much to Eve's confusion. Mark leaves to see his father, and when he returns, Eve sends him away to attack Robot. Soon, Mark returns to Eve to let her know that Robot has beaten him. Upon recovery, Mark and Eve would see William and Rick to hear the great news about Robot's accomplishments. Eve and Mark fly to Eve's parents' house to have dinner. The next day, Mark and Eve would attend the funerals of Black Samson, Kid 4, Knockout, and Cecil Stedman, people killed by Robot. Later that day, Mark and Eve would discuss a name for the baby. Mark daydreams, and Eve gets his attention. Mark goes on to say that since he's a father now, he has to be more responsible and knows that he won't let Rex rule the planet. So Mark suggests that they leave for Taliskria instead. Before they leave, Mark and Eve would visit a few close friends. First, Eve would go visit Kate, who mistakes Eve's visit as them aiding to take down Robot. They leave after an argument with the Immortal and Kate. Second, they see a movie with Rick and William. Third, Eve would tell her parents about it, with Betsy wishing they stay and Adam wishing them luck. And later, on their way to Taliskria, the duo decide on the name Terra for their daughter. They arrive at Taliskria with Eve amazed at the sights. They are greeted by Alan, but his guards attempt to attack after Terra punched Alan's eye. Alan intervenes and they are greeted by Oliver, who is donning a new appearance. Oliver asks for him and his girlfriend to cook for the duo and Mark says yes. Moments later, Mark and Eve go to their new apartment and sleep, tired from the moving process. Eve puts Terra in her crib and attempts to get intimate with Mark, but Mark gets scared and flies away, much to Eve's frustration. Just then, Oliver arrives with his girlfriend, Haluma, a lobster-like alien. They have dinner, with Eve not wanting to try the alien food. The next morning, Eve breastfeeds Terra while Mark is on the toilet. Mark attempts to flush, but it doesn't work, and Eve had to come in to find out that it works differently than a normal one. Later, Eve would attempt to have an intimate moment with Mark once again. They kiss, but Mark stops midway, crying. Eve wonders what's wrong with him, and with enough persistence, Mark reveals that Anissa had raped him after Eve had broken up with him. Eve attempts to comfort him, but he pushes her away. Mark goes on to say that he was holding back and wonders if he allowed it to happen. Eve begins to cry and she checks on Terra. As she goes in, she is shocked. She calls Mark to see that Terra has stopped breathing. Mark rushes the duo out and asks around for a hospital. They find out one and ask the doctor to treat her. Mark manages to persuade the doctor to admit Terra in early, though initially refuses because she was a human Viltrumite hybrid. Eve goes into the emergency room with the doctor, and with some tests, Terra turns out to be fine. The doctor sends Eve to get Mark, and the duo learn that the food they ate the night before isn't proper for Terra. While Mark is off with Alan, Eve is recommended Geladarian food based on the human food similarity. She cooks it and breastfeeds Terra, and later eats it with Mark. After washing dishes, Eve apologizes about Anissa's assault on Mark and asks that he doesn't blame himself for it. Eve attempts to kiss him, but he backs away. They receive a knock at the door, and it turns out to be Alan. He asks that Mark finish off Frag because he feels Battle Beast may not succeed in his assassination attempt. Eve spent the next few weeks with Mark and Terra on Taliskria. She had a hard time adjusting to the lifestyle, but made it do with her family being there. As the coalition moved closer and closer to finding Frag, Eve spent more time with Mark and Terra thinking about her life. When Mark went off to fight Frag after Space Racer had been captured, they said their final goodbyes to each other. Mark soon left and stumbled upon a cave that transported his mind, with memories intact, to his body before he originally received his powers. Meanwhile, Eve waits for Mark, but he doesn't return for years, and everyone assumes that Mark has died. During this time, Eve gets into a relationship with Telia's brother, but they split after some time because he doesn't like Eve's daughter. One night, when Eve was in her balcony, Mark suddenly returns and Eve is shocked to see him. Mark doesn't realize how long he was gone until he sees his grown-up daughter. Mark starts crying and hugs his family. After Terra goes to sleep, Mark explains everything to Eve that happened to him while he was living in his past. The next day, Eve takes Mark with her. After they leave Terra at her school, she takes Mark to Alan's office. Alan asks Mark to return to work, but Mark refuses, and Eve tells him that they are going for a long vacation as they want to spend some time together. Soon, they leave for a different planet, and when they arrive there, Mark tries to kiss her. But Eve backs away and she tells Mark that there was someone else in her life while Mark was gone. Mark says that he understands that he was gone for 5 years and that Eve doesn't need to apologize. Later, Eve, Mark, Oliver, Terra, and Haluma go to visit Alan after he was nearly killed. Soon Telia arrives with her brother and Eve feels uncomfortable in his presence, so she tells Mark and Terra to leave. However, he follows her and tries to manipulate Eve by saying that Mark could never make her feel like he did. Hearing this, Eve gets angry and knocks him out with a punch. Later, they go to meet Omni-Man, who is overjoyed after seeing Mark. They talk about a lot of things, but when Eve sees Anissa approaching, she attacks her. Mark and Omni-Man stop their fight. Eve tells Anissa that she will never forgive her for what she did to Mark. Hearing this, Omni-Man grabs Anissa, but Mark tells him to let her go. Mark then explains to Eve that he wants to forget his past and doesn't want his parents to know what happened between him and Anissa. Soon they say goodbye to Nolan and Debbie and come back to their planet. The next day, while they were relaxing, they get attacked by Frag and his children. They attempt to kill Terra, but Mark holds them back and Eve attempts to escape with Terra. Frag's daughter attacks her, and Eve engages with her while Mark fights his son and also protects Terra. Eve is joined by Mark, and then they head to Frag's location where they find that Frag killed Oliver. In anger, Mark kills Thrag's son. This enrages Thrag, and he attacks Mark and splits him in half. Meanwhile, his daughter attacks Eve and nearly kills her by breaking her jaw. But as soon as Thrag leaves, Eve unlocks her full powers in her near-death state and heals herself and Mark. But she failed to heal Oliver because he was already gone. The next day, Oliver's funeral is held, and Mark starts beating Alan as he blames Alan for his death. Eve stops their fight and punches Mark and says that she also loves Oliver, but this isn't going to fix anything. They then decide to kill Frag, but before that, they get married. They are later visited by Alan and Telia. Alan confessed that he forced Oliver to work for Frag and become a double agent. He reveals that he also made sure that Frag knew Mark and his family's location so that Mark could get involved in the war once again. But he never expected that this would lead to Oliver's death. Hearing this, Eve gets angry and attacks him. She says that she can't believe that Alan did something this horrible. But even after everything, Mark decides to help Alan in ending this war and kill Frag. They get ready and go to see their daughter before they leave. They spend their last night with her and leave her with Debbie. They start attacking planets under the Frag's Viltrum Empire, and soon they attack the main base of Operation of Frag. A great battle breaks out, and Frag commands thousands of his children to attack and kill all of the Coalition members. Soon, all of the forces of the Coalition of Planets are nearly destroyed, and Eve is rescued by Omni-Man. They head back to their warship, and Mark reveals that this was his plan. He reveals that Frag is following them with his army, and they will lead him to a stronghold which is revealed to be Earth. As the fight is in outer space, Mark tells Eve that she can't join them because she can't fight properly in space, and it will leave her open to enemy attacks. Eve gets furious, but also understands the situation. As the battle starts in space outside Earth, Eve watches it from the spaceship. As the fight continues, Eve sees Nolan, who is in a near-death state. She goes outside to rescue him, but while returning, she is attacked by a Ragnar. Anissa comes to her aid and they fight together, but Anissa sustains a serious injury from the Ragnar. Eve also takes Anissa into the ship, but when the doctors check on them, it's revealed that Anissa is already dead, and Omni-Man is still breathing. Later, Eve goes to see Mark after Alan rescues him from the surface of the sun. She is horrified after looking at Mark's body and is left hopeless. But fortunately, Mark manages to survive and recover. She goes to meet him and tell him about Omni-Man's serious condition. After Omni-Man passed away, Eve talks with Mark about his mother's condition and him taking over his father's position as the Viltrumite Emperor. But soon it is revealed that Robot has taken hostage the children of pure-blooded Viltrumites and is blackmailing them to follow his orders or he will kill them. So the Viltrumites attack their own people. Mark goes to Earth to recruit Immortal and all other superheroes in order to fight against Robot. Meanwhile, Eve thinks of a plan and goes to Thrag's children. There she asks Thrag's daughter for her help in defeating Robot, and she gladly accepts. Eve joins forces with everyone, and they, along with Thrag's children, attack Robot's base. A large battle ensues, and Eve leaves with Tech Jacket to find the abducted children of the Viltrumites. Eve finds and saves the children, while Mark finally defeats and kills Robot. Eve then takes Mark to meet Anissa's husband, and there he also meets his and Anissa's son. Mark is shocked to see his son, but he doesn't talk to him, despite Eve telling him to do so. 2 weeks later, Eve and Terra attend Mark's ceremony, where Mark is crowned the new Emperor of the Viltrumites. After this, Mark and Eve get a distress call from Immortal, and he tells Mark that there is a situation that Mark should handle personally. Eve and Mark go to Earth to discover that Marky recently got his powers and accidentally caused a lot of damage. Mark and Eve take him to the Pentagon, and their robot's brain suggests that Mark and all the other Viltrumites leave Earth because they are like time bombs, and Marky is just one of them. Eve is furious at this idea, but Mark understands what Robot is saying, so Mark and Eve decide to leave the planet along with all the other Viltrumites. After they leave Earth, they go to various planets and help their population. After many decades, Eve is very old and is in the final moments of her life. She is visited by Terra and Mark, and both of them are in tears. But as Eve is about to die, her full powers unlock and she turns back young. Now that this happened, she thinks that her powers probably makes her immortal. After this, they continue their journey throughout the universe, and Mark continues to spread peace throughout the universe. So even after hundreds of years, Eve is still with Mark, and together they are ruling the most powerful empire in the known universe. So yeah, that's all for this video, and thanks for watching.